Welcome to this episode of Innovating Employment, a podcast by and for workforce development professionals, brought to you by the Ontario Centre for Workforce Innovation. This podcast series asks leaders from across the workforce development sector to share their ideas and solutions for meeting Ontario's workforce needs. I'm your host and producer, Noah Snyderman. On today's episode, we're joined by Louie DiPalma, Director and Discoverability Project Coordinator at the Ontario Centre of Commerce, to discuss how the Discoverability Network provides employers with the tools to make work practices more inclusive for persons with disabilities. We also spoke with Tiffany Kelly, Program Lead of the Disability Confident Employer Program at the Canadian Council for Rehabilitation and Work, about how the pilot program is training employers to become confident when hiring persons with disabilities. Here's our interview with Louie DiPalma. Hello, Louie. Thanks for joining us on the podcast today.
I'm glad to be here. No, it's always a pleasure to talk about discoverability and how, companies can tap into this wonderful labor pool that can help their companies grow and prosper.
And we're so excited to have your expertise on this topic. To start, can you tell us a bit about your background and role with the Ontario Chamber of Commerce?
Yeah, I'm the director of SME programs, and what our department does there is we run programs for small businesses, and one of the programs that we operate is helping them understand the AODA, helping them understand how to implement it properly, helping them work through some of the policies and practices that are essential to making sure that they comply with that legislation. So we dispel the myths around what is required for a business to actually be in compliance and how, frankly, that will help them to become a more inclusive employer.
So what led to the launch of the Discoverability Network?
Well, we've been involved in helping businesses understand the AODA for probably the last 6 or 7 years. We've been going around Ontario, meeting with businesses in different communities, supported by our local chamber network. I should say, at the Ontario Chamber, before I get into the conversation on the Disability Network, I should talk a little bit about who the chamber is. I guess I think that would be good for people to understand. So we're a network of about 135 local chambers of commerce and boards of trades across Ontario, and together that we have a collective membership of about 60,000 businesses. What we do is we help get businesses better understand some of the requirements. We advocate on behalf of business. So we're always trying to help create an environment that helps business growth and development in the province, because as you know, vital, healthy businesses make for great communities to live, work, and play in. Okay, so with respect to the discoverability, as we were going around the province and we were talking to businesses, it became clear that businesses that were looking to tap into this talent pool really needed some assistance in doing so. And that's where the idea of the Discoverability Network was born.
So how does the Discoverability Network define a disability?
Well, it's not necessarily the Discoverability Network that defines a disability. The disability is defined in the Ontario Human Rights Code. And really, it includes both visible and non-visible disabilities, including vision loss, would be hearing loss, speech impairments, diabetes, epilepsy, things like developmental disabilities. They can be temporary, they can be permanent. So the important takeaway from the definition is that disabilities are both visible and invisible. So it's really, really important that, we should better understand how we're interacting with individuals so we make sure that we can meet their needs.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And how does the Discoverability Network help employers to find those talented people with disabilities?
Well, what we noticed when we were going around the province and talking to many businesses, we recognized that there was many sites that had been developed, and there's many great organizations out there working with people with disabilities. But what we noticed is there wasn't a site that was developed specifically for employers. So once an employer was interested in hiring from this talent pool, they were finding it difficult to actually tap into the process. And we brought in other business associations to help us, and we created a working group. And through that working group, we came up with the concept of Discoverability, which is a network, a web portal that really is for businesses to understand the business case for hiring, to help businesses easier tap into that talent pool. So specifically directed at businesses within the province.
When businesses make use of that web portal, what resources does it provide to them?
It's all kinds of resources on there. And many small businesses, as you know, really don't have HR departments, right? Because they're not large enough to sustain them. So you have the person or the president involved in the company. They're usually doing 17 things on an ongoing basis just to keep the company going, making sure payroll is met, making sure business is attracted, making sure that productivity is maintained, and those kinds of things. So what we did with the Discoverability Network is we curated content on it. So on there, a business can go onto the website. They can take a look at the resources that are there, whether they're interested in better understanding the AODA, whether they're interested in tapping into template policies that they can use to become more inclusive in their organization, whether they're looking to see what other businesses are doing. So we have video content on there where businesses that have already hired persons with disabilities, provide information and what has happened in their organizations and basically speak to the success of the hiring and how it's helped their businesses. There's also information there that would speak to the hiring process. So there's a roadmap that's been developed. There's a 6-step roadmap that actually will take a company that's interested in hiring from this talent pool directly through the various steps that they need to go through to get to the other end and actually source an individual.
So you talk about small and medium businesses and not necessarily having an HR department. What other barriers would you say are prominent on the road to hiring job seekers with varying disabilities?
Well, I think what happens is when people aren't aware of something, we tend to make it up in our minds, right? So I think awareness is a key. It's a key barrier. It's making sure the businesses understand the business case for hiring, because there's a lot of myths out there. There's a lot of myths about hiring persons with a disability. So it's really, really important that we create the awareness, that we dispel those myths. For instance, there's a myth around productivity, and I won't get into all the myths, but I'll maybe talk about 3 or 4 today. There's a myth about productivity that perhaps the people with disabilities, they don't maintain the same productivity. And that's not true. What the research has shown, and this is based on 75% of SMEs that have hired persons with disabilities, what they say is that they either meet or they exceed productivity expectations. Same thing with retention. What's really, really important for businesses, when they hire someone, they want people to stay. Because when recruiting, when you don't have a person in place, can negatively affect your productivity, and also it's expensive. So it's really important that people stay when a company hires them. So there's a myth around, well, perhaps people with disabilities, they don't stay as long. Well, the truth of the matter is that they have 20% lower job turnover rates than persons without disabilities in the workplace. Attendance is another myth out there, that perhaps that people with disabilities may not come to work as often as other counterparts in the workplace. But what the research shows is that they have an 86% rate that's either average or better when it comes to attendance. The last one I'll talk about is safety. So perhaps, the safety record might not be as great. And the truth is that 98% of persons with disability have a better safety record in the workplace than other folks. So there's some myths that we need to get over. And how do you get over them? You create awareness. And it's extremely important that people understand the talent that's out there in their communities across Ontario. And it's quite a vast talent, by the way. 15% to 16% of Ontarians have some form of disability. So in a world where and in a province where companies are looking for talent, that seems to be right now the number one issue that companies are facing, finding the right persons to fill the jobs that they need to maintain their productivity. In fact, we at the Ontario Chamber did a survey not long ago, which indicated that the number one issue for 77% of the companies that responded was finding the right talent. So when companies are looking for that talent, and we've got this talent pool that's not engaged as it should be in the workplace, for various reasons, one of them being the lack of awareness. Perhaps there's some policies in place that create some unintended barriers. Perhaps there's some architectural issues in a workplace, maybe some technology issues. It's extremely important that the awareness be created, and that's why the Discoverability Network was put together, is to help businesses better understand that business case, dispel some of those myths, and actually help them tap into that talent pool. Another area on the Discoverability Network that I should talk about is there actually is a matching platform there. So if a business is looking to do targeted recruitment and they want to tap directly into the disability talent pool, they can actually post a job on the network site. They can tap in, they're looking to do targeted recruitment. And then on the other side, we're building the supply side out. So we're looking for folks with disabilities to put their resumes into the site. And then the algorithms in the matching platform will actually match the job to the skill sets of the individuals that have put in their resumes. So it's not a job board. The job actually finds you. So it's quite a unique feature. So you're not always having to search for job titles, trying to figure out, am I qualified? Am I qualified? The job ad and the person with a disability whose skill sets match the requirements of the position will match, and then the two can decide what the next step is.
In your experience, have you found that even at the job posting stage, that can present a barrier for people with disabilities?
Absolutely. That's one of the things that we go through in the six-step roadmap that we put together on the site. We take a look at, how do you post a job? Is the job posting itself accessible? Are there any unintended barriers in the job posting? For example, here's an example. When someone posts a job, you really take a look at what the requirements of the position are. Because sometimes what we tend to do is we tend to go to the drawer, we tend to pull last year's job board, which could be last 10 years, job ad is what it could be. And then what we're doing, we're posting a job that maybe doesn't even mirror the requirements of the position that we're looking for today. So what we say to people is, one of the tips is, take a look at your job ad, make sure it has just the right qualifications that you need for the job, so you're not creating some unintended barriers. And an example would be, how many job ads have we seen for entry-level positions where minimum qualifications, 5 years of experience? So, how does that work? How can you ask someone for an entry-level position to have 5 years of experience? And it's not just the job posting itself should be inclusive. You should think about, when you're trying to develop, how am I going to conduct an interview? Is my interview inclusive? Have I broken down the barriers? Or the questions that I'm asking, provide the individual with enough time to actually demonstrate their skill sets? Because what you don't want to do is exclude someone because we haven't given them an opportunity to actually better understand the questions that we're asking and provide them with sufficient time to provide the information that we're looking for.
So how do employees with disabilities contribute to innovation and business success?
Well, to me, it's quite simple. So if we're all sitting around a table and we all think alike and we're trying to solve a problem, we have the brain power of one if there's 10 of us around that table. But if there's 10 of us around the table and we all come from varying backgrounds, varying experiences, and we now have the brain power of 10 because we're bringing differential views to the issue that we're trying to solve. Let's make no mistake about it, we're in a global economy, and to be competitive in a global economy, we need to be innovative. And what's a key ingredient of innovation? It's the talent that you have. So you need a diversity of talent, a diversity of thinking in the workplace to be competitive, whether you're competing with a company in another country or whether you're competing with a business just down the street. Those businesses that are innovative are going to have a head start to that, to becoming successful.
You spoke about how we can make our job postings and the hiring process more accessible. What are some ways that businesses can make their workplaces more accessible?
Well, what we do when we go out and we talk to businesses, we start with the AODA because there's certain requirements there that if you're looking down a pathway to making your companies more inclusive, implementing the requirements of that piece of legislation will certainly help you become more inclusive. Because what it'll do, one is you'll take a look at your policies and practices. You'll take a look and see, have we created some unintended barriers? You take a look at whether you have an accommodation policy in your workplace, and are you an accommodating employee or employer? Do you tell your employees that you're an accommodating employer? Do you have a process to create an accommodation plan? Do you have a process that takes a look at retention practices in the workplaces? Invariably, no matter who you hire, doesn't matter what demographic they come from, there's always a speed bump at the beginning, when you're doing the onboarding. So what are you doing as an organization to take a look at those retention practices so that you can overcome some of those speed bumps that you would have in the workplace? It's something that has to be planned as part of the overall organizational culture and practice. It's not something that you think about as an add-on and a bolt-on. It's like building a building, right? It's much easier when we're developing the architecture of the building and the planning of the building to build in for accessibility. It's much more difficult afterwards to make sure that we have, now we have to put an elevator, now we have to put in a ramp. Much easier to do it in the planning stages. So what we say is, when you're taking a look at your organizations, take a look right at the beginning and build that notion of inclusivity into everything you're doing, but not as an afterthought, but as part of your process in developing your practices in your workplace. Extremely important. And, the other thing, for companies, what the research shows out there is that we just didn't have enough kids. Okay. So, we have a population birth rate of about 1.6, 1.7, which means that we're really not sustaining ourselves. So where is the net? Because you need about 2.2, 2.3 just to break even. So where's the net new labor force coming from? The net new labor force is coming through immigration. So not only will that help us get the talent that we need to the businesses, but also we need to take a look at those, the demographics in our current population in our communities that aren't in the workplace as in the numbers that they should be. So when you're looking at 15% of the population, when you're looking at 50,000 students in our colleges and universities, when we're looking at, over 50% of persons with disabilities have a high school diploma, 40% have some form of post-secondary credential, at a time, I guess, when businesses are having that difficult time in finding the talent they need, can we really afford to leave all these people, outside of the labor market? What we would suggest is that no, we can't, and we need to take a look at all that talent in our communities, as well as the new that is coming in through immigration, to make sure that we meet the needs of business.
Louie, you spoke about how much more effective it is to think about accessibility while building a business rather than sort of retrofitting your policies for that. Has the web portal been something that's being used by entrepreneurs and new businesses? Because it seems like that'd be a great resource for them to start off with accessibility in mind.
That's the hope. It's in its early stages right now. We're in the process of building out the supply and the demand, so to speak, in the portal. So this is the year that we're actually connecting in a number of communities across Ontario to develop some ecosystems. So we call it a hiring ecosystem for persons with disabilities. And we're hoping that by building these ecosystems, and by that we mean we're bringing together post-secondary institutions, we're bringing together service providers, we're bringing together local businesses, we're bringing together municipalities, we're bringing together other stakeholders in the space, and the whole intent is to leave behind the discoverability network for them as a tool, so that they can work more in a collaborative way to help businesses tap into this talent pool. So yes, that's the hope. The hope is that as businesses are looking to tap into this labor pool to become more inclusive, the information is there, to better understand the business case. And if you're looking for policies as a business, because not everyone's born with a policy gene, right? So sometimes it's pretty hard to wrap your head around developing a policy. There's many policies on the website that are templated. So a business can take a look at them. They can see if it's something that they want to implement in their organization. They can take the template, adjust it accordingly to meet their own needs, do the training of their staff, and then they're way ahead of the game in terms of developing that inclusivity policy.
Louie, if you had to pick your key takeaway that you want to share with our listeners and employers, what would it be?
No, I would just say that it's really, really important if we're trying to bridge that talent gap, that we take a look at the various sectors of our population and our communities that aren't fully participating in the labor market, and certainly persons with a disability would be one of the demographics. So what I would encourage businesses to do is take a look at that demographic. Great talent in there, as you heard me talk about earlier, 50,000 students in our colleges and universities. These are people with lots of skills, yet they're not being employed at the same rate as persons without disabilities. So we need to create that awareness. We need to help companies understand that the talent is there, and then make it as easy as we possibly can for them to tap into that talent. So really, that's the message. The message is, let's better understand the talent that we're missing out on, because we can't afford not to miss out on that talent.
Louie, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast and sharing this incredibly exciting initiative with us. If people would like to find out more about the Discoverability Network, where can they find more information?
They can go to the website at discoverability.network. On there is all kinds of information, and there's also contact information. They can contact us at the Chamber for further details.
Excellent. Thanks again for joining us.
Thank you.
That was our conversation with Louie DiPalma, Director and Discoverability Project Coordinator at the Ontario Chamber of Commerce. Next, we spoke with Tiffany Kelly, Program Lead of the Disability Confident Employer Program at the Canadian Council for Rehabilitation and Work, about how the pilot program is training employers to become confident when hiring persons with disabilities. Hi, Tiffany.
Hi.
It's great to have you on the show today. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So, Tiffany, to start, can you tell our listeners a bit about the Canadian Council on Rehabilitation and Work and how you began working there?
Absolutely. I began with the Canadian Council on Rehabilitation and Work, CCRW for short. It's a bit of a good mouthful. I began with them last September. Actually, tomorrow is my 1-year anniversary with
fantastic.
them.
Congratulations.
Thank you. CCRW is a national nonprofit that works with job seekers with disabilities to assist them in finding meaningful, sustainable employment. And under the umbrella of CCRW, there are several programs. We have our Partners Program, we have our Workplace Essential Skills Partnership Program, Youth the Future, the Ontario Workplace Inclusion Program, and our Job Accommodation Service. And the program that I was brought on specifically for was DSEP, the Disability Confident Employer Program. Again, another good mouthful.
So speaking of DSEP, CCRW began piloting this program in late August this year.
Yes.
And so how did the program originate, and what's the process been like of developing it?
Absolutely. It's CCRW received a federal grant to research and develop an online training that will specifically look through the employer lens to help employers, recruiters, managers, supervisors become confident when hiring persons with disabilities. There are many, many programs out there that assist the job seeker with disabilities, which is fantastic. And CCRW we want to go to the source. We want to go to the person who says yes or no to candidates. So the person, again, managing staff, and teach and support them in disability and employment.
So how can a program like the Disability Confident Employer Program help address any issues there may be in inadequate inclusion in our workforce?
So this is actually a really good question. When we first started in September, the collaborator and I, we were pumped and ready to solve the problem of disability and employment. We were like, let's do this. Let's get in there. Let's make this amazing program and fix it. And after beating our heads against the wall in some serious brainstorming sessions, and after going back to the drawing board over and over, we realized that our training is not going to solve the problem of disability and employment, but we're an important piece of the disability and employment puzzle. DSEP is one step employers can take to sharpen their skills, to increase their knowledge, and learn about local support that is available to help them bring in more persons with disabilities to their workforce. through the topics that are covered in our training, we're going to build on what those employers, managers, recruiters already know, and we're going to give them the confidence they need to go further to better their business.
And so tell us about those companies that you're working with and the reasons that draw them to the program.
For Pilot One, we have actually been very fortunate to work with some amazing employers who are testing this for us. Thank you all very much if you're listening. We need to have 25 participants from Alberta, Ontario, and New Brunswick as per our funding guidelines. And when I've spoken with them or presented to them, be it in a meeting, on the phone, at a national conference, they're drawn to completing DCEP's online training because they want the opportunity to learn something new that's going to help their business. Each participant is a business, and this training is a way to set themselves apart because it's always important to learn something new. And in this case, it's really important to learn how to best incorporate the untapped labor pool that persons with disabilities will encompass to benefit your business.
Yeah. And in terms of that edge and setting themselves apart, one of the things that these companies will come out of with the program is a recognition as a CCRW certified employer. So what does this certification grant them?
Yeah, so it's actually a recognition. We did talk about certification versus recognition, and what the sponsors actually decided was that DCEP is going to be a recognition because we are a piece of that puzzle. So we kind of see ourselves as step 2 on the way to, firm disability confidence when it comes to disability in the workplace. So, first and foremost, participants get bragging rights. Obviously, they get to brag and say, we did this amazing program. But more than that, the recognition element, it's going back to the basics a little bit. When you did something correct at school, you got a check mark or a gold star to recognize that. And this is the same principle. It's not just, you've done something good, but you're doing something good and smart for your place of work. We've heard it time and time again, the future of the labor shortages, how employers will need to think outside the box to keep their businesses thriving. And DCEP is this. That's how CCRW approaches it. And this is how we're developing it and how we're going to eventually market it when the time comes. This is a step in the right direction when it comes to that disability and employment. It's taking employers from aware to confident to who knows what's next. There's so much more information out there. Things are continually evolving. Information is currently, refreshing itself. So we are just a piece of that puzzle. And we're very happy to be a piece in this puzzle because the more organizations like CCRW, we work together, the better we're able to make the disability employment situation become. And a goal I have for participants who take this training is that they'll also be able to make themselves role models and go-tos in their communities. A business that others can look to, ask questions from, learn from. I want to make the employers who complete DCEP future champion employers who may one day be in the training when it comes time to revamp it. So they can say, I took this, now I'm in it to share what I've learned and how I've built upon the skills that DCEP gave me.
So speaking of DCEP being a piece of the puzzle, I know that there's 6 topics specifically that you've chosen to focus on, which is inclusion in interview processes, beginning a conversation about accommodation when undisclosed, developing an accommodation plan, performance management, retention, and choosing service agencies. So I'm wondering how you came to these 6 topics.
Absolutely. So through extensive research at the very beginning of the programs when we started, and this is a huge shout out to my project collaborator, Kira Williams. She is research extraordinaire, in my opinion. We looked at topics that weren't currently covered or that maybe were slightly covered, but really could have been divulged in depth. And those are the topics that we wanted to focus on. There's no point in remaking the wheel. And there's no point in, people, busy people wasting their time, so to speak, on information they could find elsewhere. So that's what we wanted to do with DCEP. Of the 6 topics, what we decided to do was focus on the best practices element. So one thing that I've been telling participants when they sign up is that DSEP isn't a one-size-fits-all, just as disability. There's no one-size-fits-all model. Same with employment. So to try to put a one-size-fits-all on it wouldn't really work. It is a best practices. What we wanted to do was provide the information to participants that they can maybe say, oh, I'm aware of this. Maybe they can say, I had no idea about this. And what they can also learn and take back to their place of work and tailor it to suit them. So of the topic, so inclusive interview processes, it provides tips and suggestions to help employers move away from those standard interview questions that I'm sure we've all, had to go through before and have asked before, to ask questions that will really help them see the skills and possibility that a candidate can bring to the table. Beginning a conversation about an accommodation when undisclosed. This provides information for employers to help them create open work environments with practices and policies that let employees know that accommodations are available and to help them feel comfortable requesting them. Developing an accommodation plan. We toyed with this one a little bit because we know a lot of businesses, probably have this. But again, our target audience is small to medium-sized businesses. We won't exclude large, but we do have that target. So if they don't have accommodation plans, this section, it's crucial when an employee requests an accommodation. So this section gives best practice options participants can remodel, again, to suit their business needs. Performance management. Anyone who has managed staff or currently manages staff is aware of how important this is. So this section lets employers know that feedback and managing an employee's performance is the exact same, whether or not that employee has a disability. And it includes a fun choose your own adventure type of activity that we created to help participants work through a situation they may have already encountered. And if they haven't, to learn something new. Retain employees who develop disabilities. This is something that every business will have to face. Ultimately, as we age, our bodies don't work the way they used to. We don't read as fast. We don't move as quickly. We become ill. And these are all things that are a natural part of life. And this section addresses how to work with employees when this inevitably happens. So you don't lose that amazing talent who's been working with you, working for you for the past 20, 30 years. And then choosing a service agency really provides must-ask questions employers should know when looking for a service agency to work with, just as you would if you were choosing a phone company, just as you would if you were choosing your insurance company. You have questions. And so what we wanted to do is we actually tapped into CCRW's different service agencies, and we asked them, what are questions that people should be asking you? What's the information they need to know? Again, in this section, we try to let people know that not every service agency is the same. There are hundreds, probably thousands out there across Canada. And it comes down to asking those questions so you find the right fit for your business and your business needs.
So in developing the program, can you provide what your top 3 takeaways have been with our listeners?
Absolutely. So of my top 3, always be open to learning. I've had a steep learning curve in this job, and I hope I've been able to transfer some of that into the training to help participants. Never be afraid of a challenge. It can be overwhelming to think about disability and employment because it encompasses so much. And again, when we started in September, we thought we were going to fix it and that this program was going to set it all right. It was a huge no on that one, but we are an important piece of the disability and employment puzzle. And the more pieces that come together, the more complete the puzzle becomes. This is also a message for employers. Don't be worried or hesitant to take on an employee with a disability. See it as a challenge to learn from as your business continues to grow. And then the third takeaway that I really have in the development of this program is be open-minded. I came into this project with one idea in mind, from what I had been told about the program, what I had read, and that has morphed 1,000 times over in the last year. So keeping an open mind, collaborating with others, and remembering who I'm completing this work for has helped me steer this in some pretty cool directions. And I'm just eager to, see what comes back from pilot 1, how I can redirect some of the information and material into pilot 2, and then again, put that information into an amazing package that we can have ready for Canada and the participants in March 2019.
Well, Tiffany, best of luck with your goal. Thank you so much for joining the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate this.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Innovating Employment. If you liked the show, let us know on Twitter and Facebook. Links are in the description below. You can also subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Stay tuned for our next episode on November 20th. We'll be joined by Lisa Taylor of the Challenge Factory to discuss solutions and strategies for service providers to embrace the future of work. Thanks for listening.